What's up, beautiful people? I'm Nathaniel Pearl.
And I'm Sammy Sheva.
And welcome to Curious Chimps Podcast, a show where we explore the infinite complexities of the human experience.
We do not endorse anything illegal, so please, consult doctors, do your research, and for the love of all that is holy, be safe. All right, let's talk about drugs.
Curious Chimps.
Do your magic. He's still doing his magic.
You guys got to work out all the exactly your Jamie, you know what I mean? Got to work out all the audio and technical issues. And
he's the guy. The best part is he doesn't know what he's doing either. He just knows way more than I do because he just played with it for hours.
Yeah.
So I'm like a little useless in that department.
So I'm like a white belt. And Sammy didn't get his belt yet, but
Sammy's not in the dojo. Sammy's in the window like, hey, beat this guy up for me.
So whatever. What's up, Asher? Welcome back.
All right.
Yeah, we'll start it like that.
I hope we actually start before. I hope you.
Yeah, I'll leave a bunch of it in.
Welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, it's been good. Let me see. Like, I guess I'll give you all the quick. We'll go across like the basics, and I'll kind of focus on the highlight things I think are important for psychedelic research and all that. So
hit it. Let's just jump in.
I got married, which is cool.
Oh,
hey,
dope, man!
Congrats, brother. Mazel tov.
Thank you. And the girl I married is, pregnant now. She recently just got. We're trying to have it. We were in Nova Scotia a year ago, and we decided that we wanted to have a kid. We're on like a long trip during COVID, and we stayed 6 weeks in Nova Scotia. And we kind of started talking about the idea of like we want to have a kid.
Wow.
And then we got married, and she got pregnant shortly after, and that's all good. So I'm trying as quick as I can to like finish Ph.D. at this point because I really want to have as much of Ph.D. done before we have the baby because I'm going to take maternity leave. My boss is like, take maternity leave, it's fine.
What a motivator! What an animator that is! It's perfect timing in a way.
Yeah, it's pretty good timing. I'll be done. The plan is to be done with Ph.D. in December. The baby will be born in like September is our due date. So hopefully the last stage of the PhD process is you have all these experiments that you've done and they're all done. You have to just write a dissertation. You have to like write this, 150-page document about, what you spend your 3 or 4 years doing in your program and what you figured out. So that's kind of where I'm at is the writing phase, which is honestly the worst. It's the worst part about it, I think.
Damn.
It's the crappiest part.
It's
the best part is the experiments.
Yeah.
That's the good part.
Yeah, that's it. Like, you're not a writer. I mean, obviously, it's a specific, like, focused, narrow type of writing, but it's like you have to sit down and literally write a dissertation. Like, I don't know if I'm wrong about this, but I feel like PhDs are like the dissertation is always like you have to add something. Like, you have to add to like the school of thought. Like, you actually have to put in something new into like the thing you're learning. But like the way you just described it is like you're kind of talking about what you have learned as well. So I don't know if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah. No, you're pretty spot on. It's the idea that you have to whatever field you're in a PhD, you have to push that field forward and show that you've advanced the field.
Contribute, so to speak. Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah, advance, they contribute, figure out something novel, and for me that's all about like, I work with cannabinoids and I work with psychedelics, so I have to show that I've created something novel in that space, right?
Wow. Well, that's the space to be in right now. There's so many things happening.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, from my perspective, there's like, I guess you can think about it from a few perspectives. From my perspective as like a chemistry, drug design person, there was this crystal structure paper, and what a crystal structure is so psychedelics, they work by binding to serotonin. You've probably heard about this. They bind to serotonin receptors inside of your brain, and it's specifically a serotonin 2A receptor. And scientists want to know, what do these structures look like? What does this serotonin receptor look like? So you can perform these experiments, and one of them is called X-ray crystallography. And in a nutshell, it tells you in the three-dimensional space, what the heck does this receptor look like that the drug binds to? So like let me see, in October, November, a research group out of North Carolina they published the crystal structure of the serotonin 2A receptor, which was like, in my world, that's like, going to Vegas or something, or just
Wow.
something so cool.
Like the next issue of Batman came out or whatever.
Yeah,
Like-
just like, like all the people in the psychedelic space just geeking out, like, this is so cool. Somebody published this crystal structure. And the crystal structure, when you generally come out with these structures, it has a drug bound to it. Basically, we have to take a drug, put it inside the binding site of the receptor, and it'll crystallize, and you can get the structure. And this one has LSD in it, this crystal structure that they published on. And that was cool.
I was I was telling you before, I was listening to our first podcast with you, number 55, if the listeners want to go check it out.
Cool.
And you were talking about like how these are 3D structures and they're kind of like in motion as well. So like is the crystal thing, is that like some kind of like stasis? Is that what it's referring to? Is that it kind of stops moving and actually gets received by the receptor, if you will?
You actually really I'm impressed because you figured out something really interesting about this.
Bam.
You figured out that crystal structure, when you get the structure, it's like frozen in time. You're exactly right. In our brains, drugs move around, they kind of wiggle. Oh, fingers don't work because of the background. Maybe I'll take that off, actually. Maybe that's not good then. Choose virtual background.
I like it personally.
It's kind
I
of
gotta
cool.
be honest.
It's kind of cool.
I've got a few. I got this one.
Oh,
these
nice.
These are actually the crystal structures of this one.
Okay.
So the crystal structures. So basically, the blue, the magenta, and this one in the bottom, which is like some sort of weird color. I don't even know.
It looks like
maybe
intestines and
beige.
confetti, and
Yeah.
like these are
basically these blobs are drugs bound to the receptor. They're different drugs. But if you take away all those, you have these like spaghetti noodle type things. These things that look like corkscrew spaghetti, and that's the receptor. And most receptors have multiple binding sites. For example, the one that you guys are looking at is the cannabinoid type 1 receptor, which is the one THC binds to produce intoxication. But what's really interesting is actually in magenta it's a spice. Have you heard of spice compounds? These were like
the
K2
artificial weed.
Artificial, kind of. But basically, these compounds are called spice compounds, and they were designed like in the 2009 by chemists to study the activity of the receptor. But then, unfortunately, people got a hold of the syntheses and they made the compounds. And unfortunately, like they produce seizures in animals.
Okay.
A lot of animal
I remember a lot of people complaining about it and having like medical issues, like, and then it actually gave weed a bad name for a time. I mean, which it already has a huge stigma that's still around, unfortunately. But like, it's like that's all I got, so far is like that. It's like this lab THC sort of, and it's like, this is a plant. There's like 12 or like 100 cannabinoids or something, and you're just like isolating and manufacturing artificially, no less, like 1 or 2 of them, and then like smoking it as if you're smoking weed, and then people are getting all sorts of like actual health problems.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a myth or not. Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, like the compounds originally were not synthesized to be abused drugs. They were synthesized to study this receptor. One of the things that you need to do when you get a structure of one of these receptors is you need to attach a drug to it that binds really tightly. If you don't bind the drug that attaches the receptor tightly, it can fall out, and then you don't get your crystal structure. But basically, the interesting thing about these structures is that, and this one I have 3 different drugs bound, this magenta, blue, and the intestine one, we'll call it. And what's interesting is a drug's effect is actually dictated by where it binds to on the receptor, which is wild. So, for example, the one in magenta is called an orthosteric binding site. Orthosteric binding sites usually produce intoxication. So if I have a drug and I figured out that it binds to this site in magenta, it's also the other pictures where it turns 90 degrees, so you can see it over here on the right hand side. Anything that binds to that site will generally produce intoxication. Then you have these other sites, the one in blue and the intestine one, and those are called allosteric sites. Allosteric just means other. It's a different site other than the orthosteric binding site, and these are generally targets for people trying to create medicinal types of cannabinoids that can like treat like nausea. And it's funny, the one down here, the intestine color one, I have a paper coming out about this one, and this one actually reduces seizures in animal models if you bind a drug to this site, which is pretty wild. So it's this really, you know, in my world, it's like we do want to know the precision of like not only what receptor our drug is binding to, but where on that receptor the drug is binding to. What's the three-dimensional location?
That's so trippy. I love this.
It is trippy.
So
crazy.
like
Yeah.
a type of, I imagine there's a lot of variation in the molecules as well, and then where, like maybe their orientation or where they bind in the receptor then gives a different effect. So there's this like endless amount of research possible, and you're saying like if you kind of tickle that one spot, it causes intoxication. I don't know what the technical term is with intoxication, but I assume it means like your sense of proprioception maybe is off, your sense of size and distance, and like your vision, your senses just kind of get messed a little. Like I'm not sure.
Well, I guess it messes with your conscious state a little bit.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You're kind of like flipping the switch and starting to figure out exactly what's affecting what, and in a subjective state is very interesting for us, obviously, but also in these medicinal avenues, which is just obviously amazing and helpful if you can take it out the bad effects and put in the good effects, or neutralize the experience and like intoxicating effects, and just leave the like cure seizures thing.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because I wanted to ask, how do these neutralizers work? Like, there's MindMed, for example, is working on Lsd Neutralizer, which I don't know anything how that. I'm sure you have a better idea of how it functions, but basically, the premise is that if a patient is under an LSD therapy session with a psychologist, and the trip is too intense, that they can take this Lsd Neutralizer, and it kind of just shuts off the experience. Like, is that complex?
It's actually not that complex. No, it's kind of like so there's a drug called Kentanserin.
Okay.
So basically, if you bind LSD to a receptor site, so let's just use the one in magenta because that's the one that produces like intoxicating effects. So if LSD comes in, so above my head is actually some molecule. These are molecules that would bind to a receptor site. These things in blue, and these molecules at the top. And so let's say a drug comes in, it comes into the receptor site and it binds, and it's LSD. And as long as that drug is bound to the receptor, the person is going to be under the influence of LSD. And if they're having a bad trip, let's say, what you can inject is something, I don't even know the term you're talking. I've actually never heard of the term you're talking about, neutralizer, but I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So basically, it'd be a drug. So basically, when a drug binds to a receptor, there's a certain tightness that a drug binds to a receptor. Much like if you put a baseball mitt on and put a baseball inside the baseball mitt, you can clench your hand harder and it'll be harder to pull the ball out, or you can kind of like clench your hand easier. It's easier to pull the baseball out. And we call that affinity in pharmacology, the tightness that a drug binds to a receptor. And in our case, the baseball is the drug and the glove is the receptor in this case. So with these neutralizers, what you basically need to do is you need to find a drug that binds to the orthosteric site stronger than the compound currently in there. So there's this one called Kentanserin that binds to serotonin receptors stronger than LSD. And it'll basically, you inject it into the person, it'll find its way to the receptor, and because it has stronger affinity, it'll occupy the receptor site and kick all the LSD out.
Wow.
And the trip will stop. And these drugs are often called
That's crazy.
antagonist or inverse agonist.
Okay.
It basically binds the receptor site and stops the receptor from going through this further. They're called cellular signaling pathways. So it just kind of shuts it off. It binds to it, just shuts everything off. It's like puts the brakes on it, so to speak. Yeah.
Does it literally kick out the LSD molecule?
Yep.
And then I guess it stays there, so they're like the throughput of whatever LSD is still like circulating can't replace it because it's like tighter, like you said. The affinity is stronger.
That's exactly what happens. Yeah.
That's so funny to picture. Like, hey, get out of here,
Yeah.
LSD.
It just floats away
This guy's having a bad trip. He needs
onto
to
the
chill out.
onto the waist.
Yeah, they would go through your body and be metabolized. After that, it would get kicked out of your brain, and then you would pee it out.
That's incredible. That's so effective for future treatments.
Yeah, it's actually how what's the one for heroin overdoses they administer? That works. Naloxone, maybe. I think that's what it is.
Oh no, I'm thinking methadone, like the replacement so that
No,
you don't have
there's-
withdrawals. Yeah, I don't know what that
But
was.
yeah, but methadone is similar-ish. But I think the one for if somebody overdoses on heroin, you can inject. I think it's called naloxone, I
Okay.
believe. But that works the same way. It kicks the heroin out of the receptor site, and naloxone replaces it, and the heroin can't get in.
I'm just picturing Pulp Fiction with the adrenaline shot
Yeah,
with Uma
that's what I was
Thurman.
thinking too.
I'm pretty sure the drug dealer did say the term of what it actually needed, of what he actually needed to turn off the trip. But yeah, that's
What does she say when she wakes up again? I'm sorry. I just can't remember the line.
yeah. I don't know. I'm sure there's people listening that are just screaming the term, but we just don't know. Sorry, everyone.
I don't know the line either, but it's a great movie.
Yeah. But that's really cool, and I didn't know it wasn't like for me from the outsider. It seems super complex, but it's cool to see that it's like a super simple process, at least at the molecular level.
I think that's where people like. I think science seems intimidating because there is this sort of like. You do have to build up a foundational knowledge, but like, it's not that complicated, honestly. I don't think it is.
I guess
Like, if
in
you
the
can think-
end, it's physical. Chemistry is physics, like people joke about often. Like, so you learn a lot of jargon, but in the end, it's like physical, like shapes. Like
It is,
like no one
yeah.
pictures molecules and receptors like this. But like nowadays, it's like I can recognize that. I don't know what the hell I'm looking at, in all honesty, but I can go, oh, okay, that's like some biological microstructure. Like I've seen that. I've seen a lot of people talk about it. It's like, okay, I don't know how it works, but like, yeah, maybe I could learn. I could like go to school and read a book and know the names and do some experiments and learn that an LSD neutralizer is literally just like a bouncer. Just get out of here.
It's your time is done, LSD.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's cool.
That's so funny. I'm wondering if you have any info on Iboga. I don't know if this is something in your expertise at all, but like I'm curious because we're talking about like heroin and like dopamine receptors and like this thing comes in and like scrubs people and then they're not addicted anymore. And I have no idea how that works.
I can go into more like just to add to your question, like more specifically, 18-MC is the compound that a lot of people are talking about right now, because 18-MC is the I guess it's a derivative from Iboga that kind of rewires the brain from addiction and kind of shuts off that
whatever mechanism.
yeah, that mechanism for addiction. So yeah, so if you know more about 18-MC, I'm really curious about that specifically.
I actually don't,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I should read about it because I've heard
Yeah.
of it. I should read about it more. But I'm actually, I don't know too much about Ibogaine or those types
Okay.
of drugs that are used for like heavy addictions. And it's because it seems like, from what I hear, like Ibogaine, you purge on Ibogaine, don't you? Like people.
I think so.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently, it's like a few days of just hell on the body. We had a podcast with this couple that does Ibogaine ceremonies in like New
wow.
Mexico, I think, or in Mexico. And yeah, it's a process, definitely tough work, but they do it well. They have like nurses on board and psychologists, and like you have like they kind of make the experience as safe as possible, but you're going through hell at sometimes. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Is it like? I've never tried Ibogaine or those types of drugs. Have you guys ever tried them
We
for
haven't.
any reason?
Not Ibogaine.
Not yet.
Ibogaine.
I'm sure we
Yeah.
will.
At some
Not
point in our
yet.
journey. Yeah.
I don't know that I want to go through that experience. Like
Yeah.
maybe if I did have some sort of problem that I want to figure out, like some addiction or some like mental health thing I want to figure out, maybe.
Yeah.
But I feel like LSD is enough, for me. I've taken LSD quite a few times. And that experience alone is enough, to like learn lessons about life and learn what you need to do.
You're getting the message.
You're getting the message.
Yeah.
It's a good teacher.
Yeah.
Psychedelics are a good enough teacher.
I'm actually really interested in like I just have this theory. I feel like a lot of people I meet who have had regular like LSD trips are very intelligent. You're obviously smart and learned like before your trips, but like do you feel like this expanded your intelligence at all?
Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
just down
Yeah,
straight.
definitely. I think
I gotta get
for
my hands on
me,
some LSD.
I think for me, I can just think more like abstractly. I can think about like, because before I like had all this visualization software, I was pretty good at like organic. You know, when I first took like organic chemistry, where you learn about how you learn about like how to make organic molecules undergo reactions to synthesize things, and a big part of that is being able to visualize stuff.
Mhm.
And I feel like because of LSD, I've been able to like my visualization is actually a lot better in three-dimensional space. That's probably the biggest thing. I'm not like I don't have a higher capacity to think because of psychedelics, but three-dimensional space definitely is improved, I think.
Makes sense. I mean, you're seeing like what appears to be like a 5-dimensional type of visual experience when you're under the
Yeah.
influence. You know,
3D's easy after that.
I wonder, in your practice or in your field, have you been dealing with backlash, or is like the general consensus very open about these kind of molecules now?
No, it's been good,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah. So I will say though, I don't work in clinical spaces. Like clinical would be the idea where you run a clinical trial with human beings.
Mhm.
I don't do any of that, and because I'm just like a molecular type of pharmacologist where I, get drugs, understand how they work on the receptors. I don't think people in my field have that hard of a problem. Although like the early stage people like David Nichols and those types of people who first got this stuff undergoing, they had a hard time.
Mm.
But people like me in this time in my life now, it's actually like pretty easy. We like it wasn't even that hard. So we for one of our studies that's going on right now, we needed LSD, for one of these papers that we're working on. And we actually got it like no, it wasn't hard at all. We didn't even need a DEA license.
Wow.
They just mailed it to us in a little vial, and I went to pick it up at the University Supply Center, and it was easy. But I will say, for people that do clinical research, with human beings and even animals, it is harder than it is for me for sure, because I know people that work in clinical spaces.
There's definitely more regulations that they have to go through.
Because you're working with humans,
Yeah.
you're working with people that are alive. I work with like cells that are, I don't want to say. Well, I don't want to say they're not alive, but they're single cellular organisms that don't really have a brain
No one
or
cares if
anything.
they kick the bucket, right?
Yeah, no one cares.
Yeah.
Maybe they are conscious though. I don't know.
Well,
that's
they're definitely more conscious after you test them with the LSD.
You almost made him spit. That was perfect.
I almost did. That's funny though. Like, yeah. I always make this joke with my boss that I'm like, we have cells, and cells are basically like, you think about it as a circle, right? And then on the surface of the cell, so if I draw a circle with like a marker on the black line that I drew on the outside, that's where that's where one of these receptors would actually be.
Oh, yeah.
And then I always make the joke that like, oh, we're getting these cells high, just put the LSD in, you know what I mean?
You come back in a week, they're acting super different. But
you look under the microscope, they're like multiplying, doing crazy
jeez,
things.
that would be breakthrough stuff.
Drawing.
Yeah.
Playing guitar. Like
Unfortunately, it doesn't usually happen like that.
No, definitely not. No, you need a pretty complex system in order for LSD to have an effect.
Yeah. But this leads me to ask you, like, I know you published your first paper, and we both kind of have no idea. I mean, I think Sammy tried to read your abstract, and
I gave up.
he called me or texted me saying like his brain is burnt or something.
Yeah, like I needed to Google every like third or fifth word, and I was like, I can't do. I'm just gonna talk to him.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, I was super excited. It was my first psychedelic paper. I published this is my third publication.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks.
That's really cool.
It's only my third paper in the academic world, but I'm still pretty new to this. But I was super excited. It's my first paper that I published that was anything psychedelic related.
Nice, man.
But how it came to be was I think in October I went to Banff with my now wife, And I was working on some stuff, and I emailed this research. I saw this research group put out a paper about N-bomb compounds, which are a very high potency type of psychedelic, and most of them are more potent than LSD, and they activate the serotonin receptor stronger than LSD. So I saw them put out a paper, and I emailed them, and I do a lot of this. So the type of work I do with these like receptors and these drugs, it's a lot of computational stuff. So I use a lot of computers, and they call it in silico research. So you're basically mimicking a biological system inside of a computer, right? How does this biological system work inside of a computer? So I emailed them and I said I was interested, and I told them that I did like in silico type docking, and if they like wanted to collaborate on a paper, I'd be more, I'd be really thrilled. And they emailed me back like the same day, like, oh yeah, we're totally interested. We have these other N-bomb compounds, and could you work on some in silico stuff? And I said yes. And so what the paper is about is basically there's this type of N-bomb compounds. The like OG N-bomb compound is called 25-CN-NBOH, and let's not go into the discovery, but basically, I know I get down these roads too much, but basically, there are these groups in organic chemistry called methoxy groups. So it's an oxygen and then a CH3, so O-methyl, OCH3. I wish I could show you this visually. That would be so much easier.
I will Google it later.
Yeah, but it's in the paper. I don't know if I want to. Maybe you won't screen share now, but basically you can take these groups called methoxy groups and move them around the molecule, and then so these chemists from Russia that made the compounds for us, they did the organic chemistry to move the methoxy groups in different positions around the molecule. And what we were looking at is what positions do you have to put the methoxy groups in to make a really high potency drug, and what positions would you put the methoxy groups in to make a low potency drug. And what we found is that if you put the methoxy positions next to each other, the potency of the drug drops dramatically. That was kind of the key finding of the paper. So it is this weird sort of like, because the methoxy groups in different parts of the molecule are going to have a different three-dimensional shape, when that three-dimensional shape that's different from one another binds to a receptor, it's going to activate the receptor more or less, and that's kind of what we look at.
It's like geometry, like you're literally like playing
Exactly.
with the shape. I mean, so you can modify this molecule, but it still kind of retains its function.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You can, if you have a drug that binds to a receptor site like N-bomb, and you modify it just a little bit, it'll still bind to that receptor site. But if you modify it a lot, it might go somewhere. It might go to a different receptor. It might go to like dopamine receptor or a cannabinoid receptor. It can completely change the receptor it goes to. But as you said, if you modify it just a little bit, it'll go to the same receptor site.
And how do you define potency? Because you're mentioning that a lot. Like, what does that mean, really?
Good call. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, please.
Talk. So potency is if I have two drugs and I give Sam a drug, I give Nathaniel a drug, and I give you guys the same dose of a drug, but they're two different drugs, right? So I give you guys different drugs, but they're the same amounts. The one that like whoever gets fucked up easier, that's gonna be the more potent drug, and the one that gets not as messed up, that's gonna be a less potent drug.
Okay,
so basically,
like it sounds.
Yeah, the idea is that like
more for less.
Given the same amount of drug, the one that produces a stronger intoxication is going to be the one that's more potent.
How would they measure that though? If it's not on humans or living being, well, cells. It's on cells, but not on like multicellular organisms.
We so one of the one they use in I guess we can talk about animals. The one in animals they use is called the head twitch response. This is a bizarre phenomenon where if you give a normal like lab rat or mouse a psychedelic, its head will like slightly twitch. Don't know why, but scientists have figured this out, that if you give it a psychedelic, its head will twitch a little bit.
Okay.
And it'll just kind of like slowly kind of twitch, but it's really hard to count those head twitches. So what you can do is you can, getting into the more grotesque side of animal research is you can install a magnet inside of the animal's head that can record how many head twitches the animal twitched its head, and usually they measure in a 30-minute period. And what they say is that the animal that twitches its head more in a 30-minute period is undergoing a stronger psychedelic trip because the drug is bound to the serotonin 2A receptor, and thus its head is twitching more.
Wow.
That's like one of the most popular ones used in animals right now.
I guess it's theoretically like involuntary. So they're obviously it's just like a kind of clear indication that there's more activity.
There's a download.
In the, yeah, maybe.
This is just a download happening right there.
But serotonin has to do with movement also, doesn't it? Like with muscle, like.
It does.
So
it does. I mean, the complicated thing to honestly say is that receptors like cannabinoid receptors and serotonin receptors and norepinephrine receptors, they often have a widespread amount of different responses. But yeah, serotonin does have to do with movement. So does dopamine, and that's where you get the whole Parkinson's and dopamine. That's kind of a big thing too. But I guess the complicated answer is that receptors have many different functions, right? So I don't actually, to be honest, I don't know why. I don't know the reason behind when you give an animal psychedelic, its head twitches. I actually don't know.
Is there anything like that in humans?
See, that's the interesting part. It's hard to measure That's how you do an animal's potency. Humans, I don't know that there is actually like an effective way of measuring potency with a drug. I don't think it's like something people do in clinical trials. Generally what they do is they figure out the potency of the drug in an animal, and then usually you can also figure out like what's called the LD50, which is the lethal dose. So you can figure out how much of that drug is going to end the animal's life. And usually somewhere in between. So there's a LD50, which is a lethal dose, and there's an ED50, which is an effective dose. And an effective dose is usually the threshold amount of drug that produces any effect. And for most drugs, if you go in between those two ranges, you get what's called a therapeutic dose.
Interesting.
Which is a dose that produces therapeutic effects in a human. So we kind of don't have a way of measuring it in humans. So we base a lot of our findings on animal results, and kind of that's how we develop a human dose for psychedelics or any drug.
But then I guess during the clinical trials is when they start to see if the doses if they can up it or reduce it, or is that, I guess that's also part of the process of clinical trials, is finding the right dose per person and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a huge part of clinical trials. Yeah. They're simply called dose finding studies.
Dose finding studies.
That's literally what it's called, the dose finding study. And then they have dose escalation studies where they start with usually in clinical trials, they start with like a super low dose they know like isn't going to hurt a human being. This is actually funny because that's the same methodology Alexander Shulgin went through when he wrote PCAL, and that was like his whole thing. If you guys have read that book,
I haven't read it.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe we won't dive into that now. But anyways, yeah, that's basically how you do it. You start with a really low dose and you have a clinical trial about it, and then you slowly up the dose and see like where does the effect seem to have a therapeutic potential for.
Where does microdosing fall into there? Because the idea, maybe it's just not a technical term, but the idea is that you go below the sensational dose. You really just kind of have still some kind of effect, but in the long term, let's say with psilocybin, like people really tout the depression, like the antidepressant effects, but the idea is that you're not getting an effect if that's like felt. You're actually just having these right below the threshold amounts.
Yeah, that's basically the idea with microdoses. It's not even you're not even taking a dose that would be noticeable at all.
Yeah.
You take a sub. What is a microdose? Like for LSD, it's probably 5 micrograms or something. It's really low. But I don't want to be the party pooper on this, but the biggest paper on microdosing actually concluded that microdosing doesn't do anything. It doesn't actually have an effect. It's a placebo effect.
Really?
But I will say that the study only had about 200 people, so it only kind of went over. It only studied 200 people, and that doesn't mean that microdosing doesn't work. It just means that in this particular study, which is the biggest one that came out about microdosing, concluded that it actually had the same effect as a placebo.
Interesting.
So it doesn't actually do anything. But like I said, that's like, this is the first study that's come out about. It's not the be all end all for microdosing.
I think there needs to be more. There needs to be more bigger scale studies. But that's fascinating. What was the substance they were using? The molecule?
Mainly LSD.
Okay.
It was actually a few substances. They used LSD and psilocybin. Those were the two ones that were used.
And so they found that the placebo was just as effective.
Yeah, the placebo is just as effective as the actual as the LSD, right?
Interesting.
But it's also hard because when you do these types of studies in human beings, they're answering stuff on its questionnaires. That's how you do human research. It's a little bit more difficult because you can't put like a probe inside of a person's brain to record like head twitch or anything.
Well, you can, but you shouldn't. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. You can. You're right. You can, but you wouldn't. But you wouldn't get beyond ethical. Yeah.
But what were the results though? Were people overall better off?
They were overall better off with both placebo and drug.
Okay.
So when they ran the placebo next to the drug, the placebo also showed positive results, right? It showed the same result as the drug.
Good old placebo. I wonder. So I mean,
powerful.
In your opinion, in your expert opinion, I can actually say that without being an asshole. In your expert opinion, do you? I usually say it sarcastically. Is the like these higher dose things? Like I know you're not in like a clinician in this field, but
it's fine though.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, like you're in the milieu, like I may as well ask. Also, like just opinion. Do you think this is more like what is the depression fighting effect? What is the point? Like, is there a molecular thing going on, and this is just better at high doses when you can actually feel something? Or is it more of a psychological thing that you're like fucking meeting God and you're like, okay, I'm cool with my life a little bit more now?
Yeah, I will speak this. The area I'm about to talk about is not my expertise, and there are definitely better people to talk to about this. One of them is a YouTuber, Minesh Gurn. He actually does neuroscience research about psychedelics. Mm-hmm. But beyond the point, yeah, Minesh Gurn. I've met him like once, but I know he has a YouTube channel. But anyways, with that being said, I guess going from my field to a field that's more related to like why psychedelics work is you get into this whole default mode network thing, which you guys may have heard this buzzword. Mm-hmm. So you basically have these brain regions, and you have many different brain regions, and brain regions are connected by like these hubs. So you could imagine like airports. You have like, let's say the biggest airport in Canada is probably, you guys also live in Canada, so what is it, probably Toronto or
I think
Vancouver?
It's Toronto.
I don't know. It's Toronto.
Yeah.
So you imagine Toronto is like a hub. It's the biggest airport. And then you have smaller airports in Canada, like, where I live in Saskatoon. And then you have like Edmonton, Calgary, maybe Halifax, and just other smaller airports. But those are all connected by this like central hub. Mm-hmm. And in order for you to get from one airport to the other, you have to fly, via a plane. And you can think about brain regions as these different like ports, and the way for them to be connected is for you to fly from one hub to the other. And in a normal brain, let's just say that your hubs are firing in such a way that whenever you see like, I don't know, maybe you've undergone some like trauma as a kid, maybe you're like, I don't know, maybe you were like beat by a parent or something. So whenever you see a belt, you have this association with like, oh my God, like fear. You see a belt and you're automatic like fear. Your just brain goes fear, which is, how a lot of trauma happens, unfortunately. You associate an object with an outcome.
Yeah.
In this case, it's fear. So what psychedelics seem to do is to like shut these hubs off. They seem to reset these hubs that are firing in, we'll say, I don't want to say bad manners, but just like unhealthy, predictive manners in your brain. They seem to shut these hubs off and so reset these hubs. And psychedelics are the only known substances that can actually affect these hubs in your brain.
So you just kind of get a chance to make new associations instead of having this like trauma response to the belt, like you gave the example.
Exactly. Yeah, you seem to reset these hubs, and when you come out of the trip, your brain actually will like reset. It won't go back to these old thought patterns where like you see something and you associate it with something like, negative, like trauma. But I think I'm really excited about it. It's so cool that we're actually seeing, you're running your mind's measure, and there's so many psychedelic actual like companies that are, like not only raising money because they're on the New York Stock Exchange, but they're actually raising a lot of private money, which is pretty cool, from private donors.
Well, MAPS is pretty much the biggest right now, but they're a private company, and they're killing it with the donations and what they're accomplishing with the MDMA.
Yeah, that one seems to be going really well, the MDMA for PTSD thing. I wonder, like, as a person I'm not a clinical person, I'm curious when there's like, how long it'll be before there's centers where people can go to with like you have a requisition you get a requisition from a therapist, you go to your therapy session, and your health insurance covers, your psychedelic session.
I think that's coming, man. I think that's in the next 5 years, we're going to see stuff like that happening. It's already happening with ketamine therapy. Like that's a hotspot now in Toronto. There's like a ketamine clinic. We had a Ronan Levy on, and he's one of the founders of Field Trip. And they're they're a pretty big company.
Huge.
Yeah. We didn't really know at the time, but then when I was getting into these industries on the markets, I realized Field Trip is one of the big deals. But yeah, they're doing a lot of ketamine work with ketamine assisted therapy. It's fascinating.
We have one in Saskatoon, and we're way smaller of a city. We have a ketamine. I have a friend that actually goes to ketamine therapy.
Wow.
I have a friend goes to ketamine therapy. I think she's done with it now, but she was going to it for quite a few sessions. But the bad part is health insurance doesn't cover it yet, so you're paying out of pocket.
For now.
For now.
Yeah.
And one of the things I will jump in and say is I'm from the States, right? And the Canadian healthcare system is so dope. I really like it.
Pros and cons, for sure.
Pros and cons for sure, but honestly, like the U.S. system is like the treatment's great. It's really good. It's just so expensive. Like I had a pretty good job. I was working as a teacher in the States, and even I had to pay like so much money out of pocket for just like eye exams and like general checkups. Basic, and it's so cool in Canada. It's so cool.
Yeah, you gotta wait, but it's pretty free. So it's kind of it's not free, but it's.
The waiting thing I do notice, the waiting thing, but I don't know, it's good. I think it's great. And now with my wife being pregnant, we go to so many doctors for ultrasounds and blood tests, and I can only imagine how much that would cost in the States.
Ththousands. I can't. I don't.
It's so dope. Yeah. It's like weird. It's like weird to leave a medical clinic and not pay any money. It's like, what am I stealing?
Yeah, you feel wrong.
I guess we're kind of take it for granted because we've just lived through it, but when you come from like. So cool. A place where you have a fucking $15,000 bill for like a couple exams and blood tests, then
there's this show I was watching called Superstore, and the woman was pregnant, and like they're billing her. They're talking about the financial aspects. Like this woman is in the middle of giving birth, like she has contractions. She's about to give birth, and it's like this. I mean, it's a funny show. Like I'm not touting the accuracy or anything, but like they're trying to make a point, obviously that. This is reality. It's like a basic room, but it's like a nice room, and it's like, sorry, you have to leave, or else it's like just the room is like $2,000 for the 2 nights, and then it's like the doctor and the epidural and the and it's like it ends up being like $20,000, and they're like, oh my god, we have to just go to the clinic, and it's like there's a dead person like in the same room, and like they're like again like for kind of comedic and dramatic effect, but I'm sure there's a million stories like that. It's like just the way it is over there, and it's like if you have the money, you're still eating it. It still sucks. It's an arm and a leg, but you're getting it a little bit faster. And here, it's a little more gray. Like you don't have to worry about that. And you're a perfect example. Like your wife is going through. She's gestating a human in her body, and you have to constantly check that everything's okay. And it's like you would be just eating your savings. It would be horrible.
Yeah.
Canada.
Seriously, Canada. I love it, man. Yeah. I'm actually going through the process of I want to get citizenship here, so I'm going through the permanent residency process.
Sweet,
nice, man. Welcome.
Because I do want to live here. I like Canada.
Where are you from in the States, if you don't mind me asking?
Connecticut.
Okay,
East Coast.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, I love it here. It's really great, and it's honestly like, all my family, none of my family lives in Canada, just me. But like, for me, it's a plane ride home. It's
Yeah.
not so bad. Just one plane ride to get to New York City or something to see them. No big deal.
I know this is like nothing to do with anything that we have you on for, but I'm just curious to ask you
Fine.
about like what do you kind of feel are some cultural differences? Because I just feel like a lot of the world is just westernized now, and especially like we're neighbors. But like, do you feel like there's any kind of drastic like vibe difference or anything from where you're from and where you are? Yeah,
Canadians are noticeably nicer, which is interesting.
Oh yeah.
that's the trope. Yeah, that's the.
I don't know. Canadians are noticeably just more like patient and just like nicer people.
I think it's just less of us.
I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely something I noticed.
We're like, oh, a person. Hi, how are you?
It's funny because
I
I feel the opposite. It's so weird. Every time I travel, when I see Americans, they're always like super outgoing and they're just starting conversations. And I feel at least biased from where we are. It's a little bit more in our own bubble, but maybe that's just because we're in a pretty busy city.
We're in a city. Yeah, we're in Montreal.
Yeah,
so
you guys live in the New York City of Canada. You know?
Pretty much. Yeah. You can hear the honks.
The biggest city.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, I'm definitely like, I remember, it's nice in life because honestly, a year ago I was pretty depressed. Just like, I'm sure you both have been there at certain times, for whatever reason. And it's weird because I couldn't even like figure out why I was depressed. You don't even like know why you're depressed. But then I started seeing a therapist, and that actually like I never had seen a therapist in my life before ever, and it actually was super helpful. I actually found it really helpful. So now I'm more like, like pro, go see a therapist if you're feeling depressed, because I think I grew up and it just wasn't like, I guess maybe my family wasn't like normal to go see a therapist for any reason. But then like suddenly I just like, I think like the work I've been putting into my life has finally been paying off with like research and with this like VR shit that I'm getting into, which I mentioned to Nathaniel a little bit.
We should get into that after. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just got the headset today, which is pretty crazy. I haven't even set it up yet or used it, but I'm super pumped.
Cool.
Start trying this out. Yeah.
I just back to what you were saying about therapy. I mean, like I feel like it's weird because it's a relationship, and sometimes you don't have like the right relationship with the right therapist, kind of thing. But like, man, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm looking into something called somatic therapy as well. And I don't know what it is. I'm not sure, but it's like kind of this physical addressing therapy. I think a lot of trauma is just kind of like this physical remembered thing. So I'm hoping there's this kind of yogic angle where someone is like walking you through releasing it in a kind of physical way. And like I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I'm looking into it more now. And I'm actually it kind of goes around because I want to talk to a neurologist to get some. Idea of if I might have ADHD, because I'm pretty sure I have some kind of dopamine disorder, and I wanted to ask you about, because your initial research was about cannabinoids, and I'm curious because we talked in the last episode about like seizure therapy and things like that, and I'm curious what your idea or thoughts are on. I don't know if I asked you last time. I didn't listen to the whole episode, but like, is there a potential for it's stupid to maybe say simply like cannabis, but like, some of these occurring molecules in cannabis, are they potentially therapeutic for something like ADHD or dopamine disorders or I don't know, autism or something like that?
Yeah, so you'd have to the only thing, like I talked about last time, the only thing that actually has been proven to work for with cannabis is seizures. Like that's the only clinical thing that actually like works. That it's mostly CBD. It's like 90% CBD, 10% THC combination that actually works. But still, that's the only thing. There are a lot of different studies going on with like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. I don't know about addiction. I can't speak to addiction, but there are small scale trials going on in animals with other types of psychological issues for sure that use cannabinoids. But I don't, the hard part is like cannabinoids, like natural cannabinoids that occur in the cannabis plant. There's about 120, right? And there's a lot of, it's 120 different compounds being distributed into your brain that are all going to similar and different receptors. And that's why you get this widespread effect. They're hitting a lot of different receptors.
It's
So
like
you'd have to.
it's like a song. It's like this really specific, like synergistic nonsense, right? Yeah.
Yeah, almost like I don't know why I had this vision, but like a shotgun, a shotgun has those like small little tiny pellets when I guess you shoot a shotgun, and it sprays like little bullets,
Mm-hmm.
out. You go,
Yeah.
it's kind of like that almost, and it hits a lot of different receptor sites. And that's the problem with like pharmacology now, is that we don't have really advanced ways of like pinpointing this drug is going to hit only this receptor and only this receptor site. So to back to what you're saying, like, is there potential that some cannabinoid has some effect where it can help, psychological disorders or issues or that type of thing? Probably yes, but you'd have to make like a very specific drug that only hits one receptor and one specific receptor site. Because to make it more complicated, some of the drugs I work with, they are very targeted. They can hit just the cannabinoid receptor, but they'll bind to like two sites at once instead of just one site.
So there could be other effects or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
totally.
Do you ever use? I assume because you're working with molecules, it's like you're not really worried about cannabis itself, like they're just present in cannabis. So is there any difference? I think there's a plant or something called copaiba that has cannabinoid, like naturally occurring cannabinoids as well. Like it's not just weed, like there's other plants out there that have similar molecules. I was just curious if you knew anything about that.
I actually don't. No, I can't speak to the fact that I know that there probably are. Like, I know, let me think for a second. The only thing I can speak to is I know cannabinoids have humulene, like isohumulene, and so does alcohol. I know some hop plants also have some, not cannabinoids, but similar terpenes, which are aromatic compounds in cannabis plants. They have similar aromatic compounds. But people are now actually, my lab is actually, we got some of these terpenes that give cannabis its smell. And we're trying to figure out if these terpenes also have a pharmacological effect. Do they bind to any of the receptors? Because I guess not the harsh reality, but the reality of it is, what we're trying to do is, like, as researchers, is isolate every compound in cannabis plant and see if it has a medicinal effect.
Because even the thing that causes the smell.
Yeah, causes the smell. Maybe the terpenes do have an effect. Alpha pinene is one of them. It's what gives that piney smell. And that's also in cannabis plants.
This might be a dumb question, but are any of these effects possible through the smell? Or are you just talking about the molecule that causes the smell? Like, is there any kind of like effect? Yeah, this is a weird question.
This is actually a good question. I never thought about this. Like, can you inhale a drug through your nose as a smell, and could it bind to a receptor in your brain? I mean, it's a molecule, so theoretically it could. I never thought about that. It's actually a cool question. That's actually cool.
You're welcome. I'm curious. Like,
I like that.
I'm full of weird questions. Don't worry. I'm just curious. Like, how do you have just a receptor? Like, how are you? Like, you're experimenting with, like, this just a receptor. Like, do you make them? Do you harvest them? Like, what the fuck are you? Like, where do you get receptors?
That's a good question. You can actually build it, which is pretty crazy.
Whoa.
You can build a receptor from DNA, which is pretty wild.
Whoa.
And they're not that hard to build. They're really not super hard to build. We can, like, molecularly build them with it's called a polymerase chain reaction, PCR. It was made popular in, like, this technology for building receptors was like 1990s. This guy Kerry Mullins invented this process called PCR that you can use to basically build a receptor. You build it from DNA. So basically, let's just say you build your receptor, which is DNA, and then you can take that DNA and you can put it inside of a cell, and the cell has the machinery to regenerate that receptor, to multiply that receptor. It has the molecular machinery to keep regenerating that receptor.
Does this have anything to do with the tests, like the COVID tests, like the PCR? Is that the same thing?
It's the COVID vaccine uses a little bit different technology.
No, not the vaccine. The
Oh.
testing. Isn't that called a PCR test as well?
Yeah, it's called the PCR test. Yeah.
Is that just a coincidence?
No. I mean, the technology's been out for a while.
Okay, so it is the same thing. Okay, I'm just
I mean,
curious.
I guess the COVID PCR test is you would take. I mean, I don't know a ton about it, but I guess you would take a small sample of, like, they stick this thing in your nose and they rub it around, they pull it out, and that would contain some COVID antibody. And then you run what's called a PCR test, and PCR is a way of replicating DNA that you have. So if you have that COVID antibody on a little, like, Q-tip, you run a PCR test to replicate it. And because apparently, I guess you have just that small sample, you can't measure if there's a COVID antibody there. You need to like regenerate enough of it to actually get a positive response. But if somebody doesn't have COVID and you run the PCR test, there'll be nothing to regenerate, so it won't show up as positive. But it's not really a coincidence.
Okay.
PCR technology has been around since like the early 90s, actually, is when it was discovered.
Does this have anything to do with like stem cells or something, or is it just some kind of empty cell and then the DNA? So that the DNA does the work for you, but like you have this cell that's like you said, the machinery to like allow the DNA to do its job. Yeah,
the DNA itself. If I just have like a little vial of DNA, I can put it in a freezer and freeze it, but it won't multiply or anything. Like if I left normal DNA on like a hot sunny day outside, it would denature and get destroyed. So basically the DNA is just like the DNA, but it can't do anything by itself. DNA, you need some type of machinery that can replicate that DNA, and that's what the cell does. The cell has molecular machinery to regenerate more and more of that DNA.
That is eerie for some reason.
Yeah.
It's like the pieces of life, like it's like this weird code, and then the machinery that uses the DNA to make the receptor, and then you're playing with puzzle pieces, and this is
it's insane.
It's really something. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
It's ridiculous.
But that's the same way a virus works. Then it just goes into the cell, and then it just it hijacks that process.
Yeah.
Or it just rides that wave.
Yeah, clamp on, and then it'll open, and its DNA it'll go inside. And then if that cell doesn't know that it's a virus, it'll use the cell machinery. The cell machinery will just keep replicating until it knows that it's a virus. And that's kind of how, in a nutshell, that's kind of how the COVID vaccine works in a way, right?
That's pretty cool.
There's this thing that gets a lot of press news called the spike protein, right? The COVID SARS spike protein. And I guess the simplest way to explain the COVID vaccine is so normal vaccines, the way the COVID vaccine is actually like really revolutionary. It's actually kind of a groundbreaking vaccine. It's the first ever of its kind. Okay. So the normal way that a vaccine works is you basically, so let's say like what was a big polio? Polio was a huge problem like the 1950s, and lots of children died from polio, and even adults. So what you would do is you would take a little bit of the polio virus that is active and alive, and you can take literally just like a few cells of the polio virus. So the cell of the virus expresses the proteins, and that's what's going to cause damage to a person, basically make them paralyzed. And you can basically take the DNA out of the cell. So when you take a DNA out of the cell, there's nothing for the cell to replicate, right? Mm-hmm. And then on the surface of the cell, those are where these proteins are, these spike proteins. And you would then, after you remove the DNA, you would inject the virus into somebody's body, and then your immune system can read the surface proteins and know what the heck this virus is. But because the cell doesn't have any DNA, it can't replicate itself and harm you. So your body makes antibodies, and it can just destroy it, no problem. And then when you come into contact with a real polio virus, your body knows exactly what it is. Boom, no problem. Bye-bye. But the new COVID vaccine is pretty groundbreaking. The simplest way to explain it is like, let's say you have a company. Let me think about this. let's say you have a company that makes like trucks or something. They make truck parts. You know, basically you have this company that builds truck parts, and then you have this other company that doesn't build. Let me think about this. I'm screwing this up.
Analogies.
Yeah.
Just talk
trying
about
to
the
figure
real
out-
physical things. We'll Google
Nah,
it if we have to.
Yeah, I'd rather talk about the analogy. It's a little easier.
Okay, yeah. That's
Okay, let's say you have two companies, and we'll use the truck example. Both two companies make trucks, and in order for one of the companies to make trucks, you have to give them a template for how to make that truck. Like you give them blueprints for how to make the truck.
Okay.
And then the other company, for them to know how to make a truck, you give them, let's say, a replica of a truck.
Mhm.
So one company is making a truck from a blueprint, and one company is making a truck from a replica. The way that older vaccines worked is you would make the trucks from the blueprints, and the newer way that vaccines work is you make them from some sort of replica instead of a blueprint.
So
if that
basically
makes
like
sense.
reverse engineering. It's like going from the opposite.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're reverse engineering something from the opposite.
Okay.
It's I don't like people say it has all these crazy applications like in cancer and diseases, and I don't know. I mean, I'm really impressed because it's like a super new thing, RNA vaccination. It's like super new. But I'm definitely excited about the therapeutic potential of it for sure.
Interesting.
That's trippy.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the truck manufacturer in this analogy? Is that like your immune system?
Yeah, that would be your immune system.
So the
Yeah.
so the new vaccine is giving your immune system the ability, or like an example or a facsimile of COVID, instead
Yeah.
of this like inert kind of like the dead like the polio example you gave us.
Yeah, I guess if we want to go to the more real way to explain it, I guess the analogy of a real way to explain it is like we talked about the polio vaccine, how that works. Instead of giving the virus with the surface proteins, we inject this thing called RNA inside of your body that is engineered to express the COVID spike protein. So we give the cell the instructions how to build the spike protein. We give it instructions, and that's sort of the way it works.
I don't know if I should ask this, but like, why is that more effective? Why is that like have all these other applications like you're saying about cancer and stuff possibly like?
I think to be honest, I'm not sure. Like that's what I hear a lot in the news. I hear that there's like companies trying to make cancer vaccines with it. I know it's once this technology is like up and running, it's also cheaper to make. It's cheaper to make it that way versus like you have to isolate all these viruses and rip out the DNA and then inject them back into a body. It's a little bit easier to just build it and inject it into your body.
That makes sense. Yeah. So your body's doing half the job instead of the manufacturing cost. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, your body's doing most of the job. Yeah.
Well, we keep asking you about stuff that's like not your
I don't care.
field. Yeah, I love talking to you, man. But like, I would love to go back to your actual paper because I feel like I still don't know what the fuck it's about. And, then eventually I'd love to talk about this VR thing that you're working on because it seems cool. Like I saw a video of it and it's just
crazy.
From a layman, I can gather there's a lot of fun applications. We could talk about it later, but yeah, like just so I don't know. Am I being rude here? Can we just jump back to the paper? I don't know. Yeah,
I don't mind. Yeah,
Nate.
Yeah, I'm good.
I don't like.
I'm still just a little bit confused on the COVID thing, but just like the new technology, if we just clarify it for me at least, just the new technology. So instead of it doing the reverse where they're making you recognize the protein by injecting the virus and then your immune system recognizes the protein, creates the immune response.
Yeah.
So it's prepared for that.
That's right.
So for the other way, with this one that's coming out, what exactly is happening? Are they injecting like an inactive piece of the virus in you, or?
Kind of. Yeah. It's called RNA. Okay. So before deoxyribonucleic acid, before DNA, there's something called RNA.
Okay.
And So you would inject basically, you're injecting the piece of RNA that encodes for the COVID spike protein. So you inject this like RNA is like it's half a strand of DNA, so it's inactive by itself. So the RNA goes inside the body. It'll insert itself into a piece of DNA, and then that DNA will tell it to make the COVID spike protein. And once it makes the COVID spike protein, your body can recognize it immediately and be like, oh, that's not supposed to be there. So it makes antibodies for that spike protein in order to deactivate or kill it.
Very interesting. Okay.
And once your body makes it itself, it's the same principle. It's not going to replicate like a real virus, but it has that physical kind of shape. So your body, your immune system knows how to destroy it in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That is, I feel like, it's creepy to hear that it's like modifying your DNA and like all these kind of like hype, scary things that you get in the news, but your body's like, what the fuck is this? And destroys it immediately.
Yeah.
It's not like it's changing you at some DNA level.
No, it recognizes it pretty quick. It's not really, I mean, yeah, it does. The RNA does insert itself. I mean, it does, but it's not going to do anything crazy. It's not like change. It's not going to like turn you into a blob or something.
Like a strange matter, just slowly changing you.
But this is a valuable moment because there's a lot of people terrified of this new technology, how they're promoting it. Well, it is a new technology, but a lot of people just, and me included, don't really understand how it works. So I can see why a lot of people get turned off right away, and their conspiracy minds can go a little bit to the deep end. Like, well, we were just saying that your brain would become like a zombie mind or something from mutation, but that's definitely not the case.
No, I mean, it's like the efficacy rates of the COVID vaccine are incredibly high. You know, I don't have any reason to believe that it would be like bad to get. It's just I see the amount of like work that goes into science and clinical trials and safety and efficacy. It's so much. I really do trust the system. I mean, partially I'm biased as a scientist. That's why I trust the system, right?
You're also informed though.
Yeah, and you kind of see like you're kind of like in the kitchen of the restaurant in a sense. Like you're seeing the process way more than the person who's at the door going for his seat. You know, I don't know why I use the restaurant as an example, but it's kind of like you're the backbone of the whole thing. So you're very aware of the entire structure behind. You know, we're just receiving this vaccine, but you're getting the behind the scenes view.
I'm curious. Just staying on the same vein, I'm curious. Like, obviously, this was like a rushed experience. You know, like we needed these vaccines. Like, what did that rush look like? I don't know if you read some papers or if you just understand them, like the behind the kitchen, like we were saying. Like, did things go faster because there was more money? Was there already stuff being worked on, and then they just implemented certain technologies? Like, is there any kind of rush job, like harmful? Like, is there anything bad about it being faster? Did they just let things go to human trials faster? Like, what was the scenario there?
So a good example is let's pull ourselves back to the 1960s. There was a drug called thalidomide. Have you guys heard of this drug?
No.
So there was a drug called thalidomide that was released in Europe. That was a drug for morning sickness. And there wasn't a lot of research on, there wasn't a ton of research on it. And without like a lot of the clinical trials for thalidomide experiments didn't last that long. They were like 6 months or a year. And because of that, the American FDA was like, no, we don't want this drug in America. And unfortunately, they're called thalidomide babies. A lot of mothers who were taking thalidomide for morning sickness were giving birth to babies like missing limbs. You've probably heard of this before. But so that's so we are really cautious about clinical trials because of that experience. And I think like, I don't know like why people are so, I don't know what it is that people are so skeptical, like exact part of the vaccine they're so skeptical about, like what angle they're coming from. And I can't say that I know the exact, like the COVID vaccine was definitely like, when there's an urgent need for a medication or a vaccine, they go through what's called the fast track process. You can apply for a license from the American FDA or the FDA, and you can get a drug fast tracked. for therapeutic use of people, because it's seen as like, we need this, or people, like, lots of people are going to die. So the COVID vaccine did go through this fast tracking process. Normally, a medication, the average medication, goes through about 5 years of trials before it's like made deemed safe to use. The COVID vaccine, it did only, we were only experimenting on it for like 6 months to a year. So it was a little bit risky in a way. So what was done in order to combat, like, this has only been tested for like 6 months to a year, is they ran like more and more clinical trials. They just ran bigger and bigger clinical trials to sort of account for that, to see a global effect. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, it was a fast track thing, but they didn't take any time was the only shortcut, I guess, in any. All the other efficacy studies were gone through and seen as safe, but it did go through this much quicker process, because
that's reassuring.
like I said, we just need it. It's like, this is a race.
That's a really good context. Like, instead of it feeling like we rushed this, it's like we really just take our time usually with other stuff. We just go through some extra safety nets for other stuff, because why not? It's just all the better to make sure it's effective, to it's an investment issue as well. Like, you're just taking more time with it and making sure that it's going to do what it's going to do, and no one pops out missing limbs or whatever. But this just skipped a few of those steps. But like, medically and scientifically speaking, all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed. Like, there's no way to really skip that. No one would want to anyway, really, because you're going to destroy like lives, not only the people taking the vaccines, but then the companies and the investors, and everything is just like, no one wants to see that happen. No one wants to see that fail. So it's like, I think people are just scared. Like you asked, like, I don't know why people are skeptical. We know why. It's people are just conspiratorially minded, because a bunch of people are going to get rich off of something, and people get pissed off because everyone's in a tough way. A bunch of people are losing jobs. It's very emotional. It's not necessarily wrong or bad, but it can very much be, a misinformed, just kind of knee-jerk reaction, and people are just scared.
That's a good point.
Right.
That's a very good point. And I would add to that it's also, to be honest, it's lack of education. It's just a lot of people, me included, just don't have a fucking clue. And it's so much faster.
To trust,
yeah. And then, but you're getting information off, but then you're getting information off of a YouTube video that's designed to convince you in a certain way. And it has like these foundational bases that they're just throwing these terms at, and you don't really know these terms, these science terms of what's actually happening. And then you take it for granted, you believe it, but it could be completely off at the foundation. So I see how it can form, and kind of the whole COVID situation is a great example if you're talking about the money behind it, because a lot of people lost their jobs and they got angry, and then they see that there's like these profit machines that are just pushing their product, and I can see how it fuels all these emotions.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess one of the things, going back to talking about fast tracking medications, is like, before most drugs are released, they're actually tested on pregnant people to make sure there's no side effects. And COVID vaccine was approved before people that were pregnant were tested. Okay. But I guess going back to that, only recently, like as of 5 days ago, there was the first ever. They confirmed that if you are pregnant and you get the COVID vaccine, your baby also will have the antibodies for COVID. So your baby will also get vaccinated.
I actually read an article about it. They were saying that they want to.
It was a paper.
Yeah, they want to give like there's like priorities of who gets the vaccine first, and pregnant people were on that list. So it's kind of eerie that like that those proper tests have not been done, but like now it's being shown that you're vaccinating two people for the price of one, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, like I said, there is sort of that fear there that it was fast tracked because it was like, it seemed necessary. Like it seemed like a lot of people were, dying, and businesses are getting shut down. The world is not functioning as it normally should. So we need to like get this going. So yeah, I mean, I do, from that perspective, I do understand a little bit of concern from the whole fast track perspective.
That makes sense. Yeah. So you don't have that let's call it a irrational or like uninformed fear, because you've done like a decade plus at this point of education, and you can read a paper or something, or even just have an idea. It's not even really in your field per se, but you just have all this background in similar basic foundational sciences, so you can you might still have some faith because it's not your narrow specific field, but it's informed faith. Like we're really jumping blind. Like the layman is just like, all right, I'll put this thing in my body that changes my DNA or whatever, And like Nate said, you watch some fucking YouTube video and there's some compelling swelling music and some guy telling you that it's the government wants to and you just,
and you're all in.
It just feeds into your People are afraid on both sides. I don't know. It's a weird. We could talk about it forever. It's a rabbit hole.
It's not that productive.
No, it isn't. You're right, man. It really isn't.
It's not super productive. But I mean, it's things are getting better. I'm hopeful about everything. Things seem to be getting good.
There's a light. Things are getting interesting. I think it's funny that there's a lot of. I mean, again, this is totally off topic, but like you're seeing like riots, you're seeing protests. I should say protests more than riots. You're seeing laws about protests coming out about how cops can be treated by people. Like it's getting really squirrely. It's not even about COVID anymore. There's this huge uproar in I think in Israel right now about like vaccination passports and things like that. Like it's So this gets very much about like social experience and how you're treating people who are afraid, who don't want to get the vaccine, so it's like it very indirectly we're suddenly realizing there's a problem with ignorance. We're suddenly like, oh shit, like we really need everyone to be smarter so that this is not like this is like we're hitting the brakes. COVID hit the brakes, but now we're also like, oh no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be in this thing. And there's all these debates in the street where nothing really gets solved. Like you said, it's not even productive. We should stop talking about it. We should actually just get back on track. I would love to keep, like, we don't have you for much longer. What the fuck is NBOM? What does it do? What is your paper about?
You mentioned NBOM in the last podcast, and I don't really remember exactly what it is. So yeah, I'm with Sammy on that too.
Yeah, let's just hard left. Like, let's just get the fuck out of this COVID conversation.
It was I guess I can drop the person's name because they probably want to get mad at me for it. But so there's a chemist named David Nichols who's really popular in the psychedelic space.
Okay.
And let's hope he doesn't hear the podcast. That's fine. I don't think he will. But anyways, he had a graduate student that was, let's say, psychedelic curious graduate student. Messed around a little bit. And he told me this story when I met him about, he was working on these NBOM compounds, and he's been working on psychedelics for a long time. And the grad student makes a few of these novel NBOM compounds. The first time ever in like the 90s, he makes these compounds. And, David being the PI, the boss, goes to the grad student, I have this protocol, can you make these compounds? He goes, sure. So he makes them. And the student, being psychedelic curious, takes some home, takes some of the drug home with him. And he ends up like ingesting some of the compound. And he calls his boss, David Nichols, like, David, I took some NBOM compound, I don't feel so good. And David shows up to the kid's house, and the kid's like on the floor in the fetal position, like, he's like, he has a blank stare, and he's like, oh, I see the light, it's so beautiful, David, it's so beautiful. And David's like, you fucking idiot, like, why are you, like, this is not professional, you're a graduate student, you're fucking around with like my drugs, not okay. So the kid eventually like comes down from his trip, but not really. So the kid ends up getting arrested like later that night, and the kid calls David from jail, and he's like, David, something happened. I don't know what happened, but I woke up in jail. And he picks the kid up from the police station. The police tell David that the kid was like running through the parking garage just naked, finding the light, chasing the light, so to speak. And that's where the compound came from. It came from this guy's lab who is a psychedelic chemist, one of the early psychedelic chemists. And it's basically just a compound that binds to serotonin receptor stronger than LSD and it also activates the receptor to a stronger degree. So if I gave you a dose of N-bomb and I gave you a dose of LSD, you would be more intoxicated and tripping harder off of the N-bomb, which is the same dose. So it basically just
Exponentially
activates
stronger.
the receptor stronger. And yeah, the whole paper, like I said, it was just about looking at, can we change these methoxy groups on the N-bomb molecule? And if we change those, how does that affect the potency of the drug? That's really all it's about.
I would ask you, so with this paper out, in the future, if some company wanted to use N-bomb as a type of medication or to see in a clinical trial, they would resort back to your findings for the purity and then go from there. So that's how it would kind of extend outwards.
Yeah, the next thing somebody would actually do with our paper is they would run it in animals. They would use
Interesting.
we have these potencies in the paper and stuff. They would use the potency of the drug to administer it to an animal at a reasonable dose. So basically, research goes from like, my field is about as fundamental as it gets. It goes from like the cellular, molecular stuff, then it gets passed to the animal research people, and then after animal research people have like deemed that it's pretty safe, they then go to phase 1 human clinical trials. It's like a pipeline, right? It's
Yeah.
like a progression.
So you guys are like ground zero of the whole process of getting a drug to
Yeah.
market.
Yeah, we're very early stage. Honestly, from the time that we see a structure of a drug to the, so in the past, in let's say 20 years ago, from the time somebody like me saw the drug and quantified it to the time it was made into a medication, that whole process is about 20 years.
Wow.
That takes like 20 years. Now it's about 5 because of advancements. Now it's like about 5 years,
Wow.
maybe even a little bit less, maybe 3 at
Thank
this point.
fucking God.
That's
20
A lot of
years
research.
yeah.
That's a career. That's a generation.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's definitely like, it seems slow for sure, but
It seems thorough, to be honest.
it's very thorough. As we get more advanced, that time gets faster, and we're getting like,
But just talking about
many-
the fast tracking from the COVID talk, it just seems like that's going to revolutionize medicine in the future, at least that process that, hey, we can actually come up with something in a year.
that was insane. I mean, like,
Yeah.
that's literally like, the first COVID, the crystal structure, right? The crystal structure of the COVID receptor antibody was crystallized like only 6 or 7 months before the vaccine was released, which is insane.
Wow.
That's like from when I see the drug to it getting approved is like 8 months. I mean, that's like, but you also have to realize so many people are working on that problem. That's
Pretty much
why
the
it
whole
was
world, in a sense.
literally the whole
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, we
was
threw
working
the
on it. That's
kitchen
why it
sink
happened
at
so
it, yeah.
fast.
Wow.
Do
But,
you think there's any? I mean, I guess you're again, we're asking you to jump out of your specialty, but like, do you seeing the effects of N-bomb? Can you speculate on some possible uses or something? Like, what could this be used for medicinally or as well? What are some of the psychedelic effects actually that were experienced by this student? I'm curious.
Yeah. So one of the big differences between our N-bomb compounds and the ones that were used by the student is there are certain molecules you can put on. They're called halogens. They're molecules like fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And the reason they're put on molecules is because it makes it easier for those compounds to get across the blood-brain barrier. So, but the problem is those compounds often cause seizures, unfortunately. So in our N-bomb compounds, we took off the halogen. So we actually think there might not be as crazy effects as the drugs, but we won't know until we put them in animals. And I don't know when. I feel like the lab I work in could do it because we do animal work too. So I wonder, like, and we have the compounds like in our freezer. They're there. I wonder, like, if my boss would probably like let somebody do it if they wanted to.
Wow.
See what happens. Because we are starting to do. We just got a grant from this company called Silotech. So
Okay.
we're like my lab is just starting to do psychedelic like research. The guy I work for is just getting into that space now.
Very
So
cool.
like we could run it in animals, and I don't know. I mean, like in terms of In terms of therapy, until I saw an animal study, I wouldn't know. It's you can't tell much of the therapeutic potential of a drug by looking at it inside of cells. You can only figure out the potency, like how potent it is.
Okay.
So I guess your part of the pipeline is really just isolating these molecules or these potential drugs, and then I guess the funding of a certain problem will look for something that's similar that can help, and then it goes down the pipeline to animal testing, etc. So, but you guys aren't really concerned about what this will be used for. It's just more about creating the purity and the isolated structure. So,
Exactly.
interesting.
I'm very far removed from like getting drugs approved for.
It's kind of cool though.
Even animal. It's very foundational. It's called basic science is what we call it. We actually call it basic science. Basic science, then there's clinical science, and there's translational science.
Okay.
Right? There's all these different approaches.
Okay, I see why it's called basic science. Okay. Because you're just doing science. Like you're not. There's no application research. There's no trials. It's literally the opposite of clinical. Yeah, I understand. That's
basic
cool.
science. You can do very like foundational things. And the people even further back from the pipeline, like more fundamental, are the people making the drugs. That's really where it starts. I'm not an organic. I mean, I used to do organic chemistry. I don't do organic chemistry anymore. But that's really the start. Somebody building a drug, right? And and using computers now is what I'm getting into, is drug design. Like, how do you design a drug? It's kind of where I'm getting into a bit too myself.
Yeah, we could bleed into this other topic.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, how does this tie into this VR thing that you're getting into?
I am so pumped about this.
I see.
This random dude from this company called Nanome just hit me up on LinkedIn. He's like, I saw some of your YouTube stuff. I liked your graphical abstracts. I think I have something interesting for you. So he tells me he works for a virtual reality bioscience company. I'm like, what the hell is virtual reality bioscience? And he just goes, watch this video. It's the same one I sent you. And I was just like, holy crap, that is amazing. So basically what it is, it's like, we're looking at these receptors now in my background, but these are two-dimensional. We're just in a screens are two-dimensional space. But if you put on a pair of virtual reality glasses, you can see things in 3 dimensions. So what this company thought would be a good idea is to take these two-dimensional biomolecules and figure out a way to display them in 3-dimensional space. So you put on a pair of VR goggles, you can see these receptors in 3 dimensions, and you can also do what's called ligand-based drug design in 3-dimensional space. A lot of the times when you want to figure out how to create a drug to attach to a specific target, you have to figure out what's the 3-dimensional shape of that target. Kind of like if you have a square versus a triangle versus a hexagon. What does my 3-dimensional space look like? And then you build a drug that will occupy a sort of similar 3-dimensional shape as that, and that's called drug design. So you try and figure out how to create a drug that'll 3-dimensionally fit inside of the receptor, and that's kind of I don't know how much. So I do a lot of this stuff on computers now with like programming, that kind of thing. I do a lot of drug design type. So like these pictures were actually created with a lot of drug design software that I generated. But to be able to do that in a 3-dimensional space is, from my perspective, just absolutely incredible. Because it is hard to like work on a 2-dimensional screen and try and figure out, what does that thing look like? How do I build a drug to fit in there? But you have a 3-dimensional space, it really changes the game. And it's even being used in teaching chemistry in like universities now, is using virtual reality to see molecules in 3 dimensions. What does a molecule look like? Versus like this abstract idea of something.
That's incredible.
What kind of applications are there? I mean, like you went through it already. I guess it's just hard to appreciate because we're not in the sector, right? But like, I guess I can understand like you're manipulating a 3D object on a screen and you have to kind of turn it and see what's going on, and you're not getting the whole picture. Whereas now it's just. I saw the video and it must be so much more intuitive. You can change things on the fly and like with your hands, you can share these things as well because it's like an online space. And I feel free to get a little nerdy here, even if you lose us. Like I'd love to know how can you use this? And obviously the teaching aspect is obvious,
That's
But
the biggest application, I think, honestly, is education for sure. Yeah, because to be honest, like the market for researchers like myself is like, I mean, how many of like me are in the world that really care about this like 3D space and want to use it for just molecular modeling? Like, not in reality, like the people that you're going to teach in a university is way more than the people like me that are using it for these applications. So I'd say my my like small area is definitely a really cool application of it, but I think teaching is where it has the biggest impact for sure. Because think about like, I don't know, like if you're learning history and you want to see how some war was played out, you can read about it in like a boring textbook, or you imagine you can like recreate what that war looked like in three-dimensional
And
space.
you're like kind of
You're
physically
watching.
there in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see
Physically there.
the educational applications massive. I already could just picture my early science classes of just learning about electrons and protons and whatever, and just seeing it on paper and how disconnected I felt to this concept. But imagine spinning it around in my VR goggles and looking at it from every side and really seeing how it works. It's just gonna exponentially grow my interest of the field and the learning process.
Yeah, I
That's
think
cool,
it's
man.
yeah, I think it's like it's
Because you're
I haven't
immersed in
even
it. You're
yeah,
in it.
I literally got they mailed me an Oculus, like I got it today at
Cool.
like two
Nice.
hours ago, and I was like, oh, I gotta try this out tonight after the podcast. I gotta try
That's
this
so
thing out.
cool.
I also find
Like,
it interesting that you're using this in like to actually structure the molecules, and then that's the same program that people are going to be using to learn. So so there's this really like there's this kind of scaling, like this translatability where I don't know if that's probably something similar in school now, but like your like the teacher student experience is kind of more like switchable. I don't know. I'm losing my words here a little bit, but it's like you're gonna be using this like intuitive kind of like it's almost cartoony, you know, like it's really easy to use, and you have these molecules that are in your hands now, and you like you're saying about you manipulating the geometry, like you can literally see the numbers and see the angles and like maybe just pause something and then change the angle and then have some kind of 3D structure of a receptor and see if it's gonna work or fit or something, and you don't have to do all the math or let it render or whatever the fuck the old programs are doing, you know. So I'm probably not as excited as you are, but it looked really cool, you know. Like,
like I haven't felt this way about something in a long time, like this excited about something.
Wow.
Because I spoke to my boss about this, like, because I'd heard about VR. I heard about VR bioscience companies like maybe 2 years ago was the first time I heard about it. Because honestly, when did like Oculus probably came out like 8 years ago maybe?
Yeah.
it
When did
feels like
Oculus start?
yeah.
I
7.
tried
When
them.
did
I went to a conference in like 2011, and I was mind blown at the technology at the time with the Oculus, what they were able to produce. But that was like N64 quality to what it is right now, you know, or even
Yeah,
before like
I
Sega quality.
yeah,
So
I haven't even tried one at all. I've never
yeah,
even tried a set of VR goggles, so I'm like, holy shit, it's gonna be
but it's
crazy.
in its infancy, and where it's going to go from even today in 5 years is going to be, it's going to be just, I don't even know what, it's just going to be no different than regular reality. It's going to be like completely
Yeah.
identical.
Yeah, just
Like
more
honestly,
processing.
wherever I kind of want a faculty position. I like teaching, teaching and research, and I want to be able to do research and teach. But wherever I get a job, I want to figure out like how can I get these in classrooms? You know,
Nice.
like how can I get this in my chemistry, classroom
For sure.
teaching, especially organic chemistry where it's all three-dimensional and you got to think about shapes and just it's gonna be crazy. it's gonna be
A
so
lot of
cool.
people I talk to hate or are scared of organic chemistry, like in school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's playful like that and really like easier to, like you even said, like it took LSD for you to really be able to kind of visualize it. Like if it's in your face that way and you're just learning, like learning will become faster. Like as the sciences progress and we can streamline vaccines and stuff like we talked about earlier, we can even make scientists faster.
Yeah.
Like that's fucking cool.
Yeah, it's like I can even like I don't know. It's like you can imagine like I couldn't teach a 5-year-old organic chemistry, but you could put a VR goggles on a 5-year-old and be like, ooh, look at the shape of this thing. Oh, you can turn it, you can move it. It's so it's cool. It's so interactive. It's like the more the more of your senses you can use to associate or play with something, the stronger or easier it is to learn that thing, right?
Well, you know, I've always been, well, I've been saying this recently to a few friends now, is that I think the future right now, because up until now it was really technology and the more of the social aspect grew exponentially, and the iPhones and all these kind of fun stuff that we can just use for information. I think the next stage of innovation is going to be in the healthcare. And I think it's because of the merger of technology and health and science is all going to just kind of fuse, and we're kind of hitting that pinnacle now. So I think things like this is just going to ramp it up, but it's exciting times to see how technology and health are kind of going to click together.
It's wild. It's like it's funny. I was talking to my my aunt last week, and my aunt knows that I'm like really hardcore into psychedelic research. And she goes to me, "Isn't the world psychedelic enough?" I'm thinking, yeah, honestly, it kind of is. You know, the world without psychedelics, it is pretty crazy. You know, the world without psychedelics, like technology advancing and like the amount of diversity you can experience in a day with like your relationships with like your people to like your job. It is a really like psychedelic experience without psychedelics.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah.
I love that. I'm sure. It sounds like she's looking out for you. She's like, "Why you gotta do the drugs?" Yeah, like like the mom energy. But that's a good point, though.
Yeah, she definitely. I don't trip that much. I think the last time I tripped was like almost a year ago in Nova Scotia. I feel like I think I like to do it at this point in my life maybe once or twice a year, and that's it. And I don't smoke weed at all, like anymore at all. So I just that's sort of my. You know, it's like I have time off from work and I can go take acid and like kind of have fun, but also have insights. You know?
Yeah, fuck it, why not?
But
yeah, exactly.
You know?
I feel like it's so informative for your work too. Like it's maybe not so directly, but it can be so motivating and maybe like give you some ideas because it's a trip and you're expanding your horizons. But also in a very direct way, be like, oh, like what is this doing to my brain? What maybe you'll come with ideas. Maybe you'll try another psychedelic and be like, oh, what can I do with this? Maybe I can bring this to the job. Like I don't know how much control or freedom you have in your work, but like
a lot.
As you go higher into your PhD, like you're more in control, and it's just perfect that you're also the lab. Like your body is the lab in some ways. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like vertical integration in a weird way, or it's like we said before, like you're really upstream, so in a lot of ways you don't really know or even care to understand what the applications will be later on, but like this can be so inspiring for you. And like I'm curious actually, like the Nanome VR thing, like what's the first thing you're gonna do? Like I'm sure you're just gonna try to get used to the interface for a while, but like do you have an idea of like what you want to build or something? Like are you gonna make an LSD molecule or something? Like what's your first?
So the reason I was given the first thing I have to do is like this guy that I'm like, who gave me the headset, he wants me to like go on to the Nanome, basically like promote their product a little bit, if I'm being frank. Of course. So I would go onto their platform. I would meet him in VR space, and the reason that he wants me on there is because he actually wants to talk about psychedelics on their platform. And he wants somebody who kind of knows a little bit about this stuff, and he kind of found me, right?
Good man.
So the first thing I'll do is kind of go into a VR space with him and talk about the psychedelic or serotonin 2A receptor, and talk about like what's known about the receptor, why does LSD have such a high potency, how does LSD work, and we'll kind of talk about that in a 3-dimensional space.
That's awesome.
But yeah, to be honest, like I haven't used the platform, so I don't have any research ideas yet. I just want to see these things in 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
Is this going to be on Twitch? Of course. Is this going to be like streamed on Twitch or something, or is like?
It's Nanome has a YouTube. They have a YouTube page and they just post the videos there. Okay. Cool. I don't know if they're going to live stream it on. They might live stream it somewhere, but yeah, I'm not sure. Because the last series they had was about COVID. Cool. They had like 10 episodes about the COVID spike protein. That was like that's honestly where I learned about all I didn't read papers about COVID. I just learned it from all the Nanome stuff, which was super immersive. It was cool. Nice. They had scientists come on and talk about the COVID spike protein and what it looks like in 3 dimensions. So
I didn't think about it, but that social media is another huge aspect of like you can like the layman also is going to just learn so much more and really have this deeper intuitive visual understanding and instead of being like a
Yeah.
boring lecture. Like I keep seeing papers where people are like, you don't know what a cell looks like, you don't know what an atom looks like, you see these dumb drawings, you know, and now it's the opposite. It's like, this is literally what it looks like, and I can spin it
Yeah.
for you and
Mm.
upload a receptor and stuff and share it
Yeah,
over
you
the
can-
internet. Yeah, man.
You can do crazy stuff. The place that has all these structures is called the Protein Data Bank, and apparently you can just like really easily export a file from the PDB to the headset like instantaneous. So
Wow.
you know it's pretty crazy.
That's
but
fucking cool.
It's exciting times, man.
yeah, it's I'm super excited about being able to play with molecules, and I feel like a kid playing with Legos. You know?
Almost exactly.
Check
yeah.
this out.
Well, it's like you're finally meeting these structures in 3D space when you've been researching
Yeah.
them your whole life, like on paper and in in the lab, and now you can actually immerse yourself in their world. It's kind of mind blowing. I can imagine your excitement. I wish I shared it,
Oh, yeah.
but I see the other applications.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally okay. You know what I mean?
That's
Yeah.
cool.
That's amazing. I guess we could end it there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, is there anything else
Yeah,
you want to
please.
touch on?
No, we've been going for a while. That's probably pretty good.
I don't. Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
have a clock this time.
Yeah.
We actually have no idea.
It's 5 p.m. So we've been probably about because we started a little late, so maybe an hour and 45 minutes.
Well,
we've probably
that's
been going
perfect.
for.
Yeah, that's cool.
Fuck
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Well, okay, man. Yeah, dude. I mean, it was fun. We could probably keep talking for a while, but like, I just.
Oh yeah, it's totally.
I'm glad to have you back on, man. It was fun. It was fun the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
time. It
we-
was fun this time. I
Yeah.
just want to say congrats, also, dude.
Yeah.
Like your PhD is almost
Thanks.
done. You got
Thanks.
this cool VR thing. Your new wife is gonna have a baby. Like, just
It's gonna be
fucking.
tripping itself. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Your aunt was right, dude.
Dude, she is right. She
Yeah.
knows. You know.
Life is trippy enough, man.
Yeah. Damn.
Yeah, life is beautiful when things are going well. Life is just miraculous when things are going well. When it's not going well, like kind of sucks, you know.
But it's
Yeah.
also beautiful in hindsight when you get through it.
It is those shitty times.
Yeah.
Totally.
Because they're catalysts to big changes. They really can.
I'm sure they got you here
Yeah.
in a weird way. Yeah, we can have that weird philosophical like you are what those crappy moments. But
Yeah.
man, yeah, the appreciation of it. You just get to kind of bask in it, especially during COVID. It must be
Yeah.
just like you said, like the depression hit you and stuff like that, and now you're just in a different place, like in a totally different place.
Yeah,
Kudos,
totally.
man. Honestly, it's fucking fun.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah, it's been really good. It's been really good. This
Is-
has been, of course, very fun.
Is there anything you want our listeners to try to follow along with you, or anything they can check you? I know you have a YouTube channel. You can plug that
Yeah,
in.
I have a YouTube channel. That's just my name, Asher Brandt.
Nice.
And that's my main stuff where I post like content that I think is interesting about psychedelics and about research.
Cool.
And I'm still like, I don't know how you guys are doing with the YouTube thing. I still don't understand social media, how to use it that way. I still don't know how to
I
like
feel like an old person.
optimize.
Yeah.
Just like putting crap out there.
I think
I
it
don't know
just.
what I'm doing.
I think it's consistency, and then eventually it catches on. That's the method I'm going on, and that's what works for so many people. So
Yeah.
just be passionate about what you're doing, and look, your stuff is super interesting. I have no doubt in the future, it's just gonna,
Yeah. I want to make all the past videos with VR now. Talk about everything in VR.
Mhm.
All the new videos in virtual reality.
Yeah, yeah, I'm joining in on that.
Yeah,
I got to
I'm
get
down.
myself a
Cool.
VR set.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I don't even know what they go for, to be honest. I don't know what the Oculus things even sell.
It's getting relatively
They're-
cheaper. It used to be like
Yeah,
over
they're-
$1,300. I think now it's
They're
like
still pretty expensive,
Yeah.
though. I think they're at least like $500, $600. I'm imagining.
I don't know.
I think cost has to come down for them to be like people to have them in classrooms, right? The cost is still too much, I think.
yeah.
And you need a computer to run it, and
Exactly. You need a high powered. That's the problem too. Yeah,
Hey,
we're getting there.
but that's it.
Yeah.
Whether it's now or in 10 years, it's happening. It's just a matter of how long.
Exactly.
All right, brother. Well, thanks for joining us again, man.
Of course. Of course.
That was awesome.
Yeah, always good. Talk again in a few months or something.
Anytime,
you know?
man.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, brother.
Okay. All right. Bye, guys.
See you,
Take care, man. Have a good one.